Rev up your chainsaws. It is time to go back to 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. 50 years later, this is our review of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves, mental health awareness, and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I am a writer, podcaster, and our Horrific Hope Film Festival director here. If you guys would like more information about our upcoming festival, what we do as a nonprofit podcast, more movie reviews like this, links to our social media, Patreon, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. Click the links in the descriptions below. For as much as I love this movie, it bothers me that it's the same name as the 1978 John Carpenter masterpiece. As much as I love this movie, it is one of my favorites of the year. I hate the fact that it is named after 1996's Scream of the same name by the late, great Wes Craven. Here we are again with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, doing what they did 9 years ago with Texas Chainsaw 3D. I know that movie gets a lot of hate, but in a lot of ways, it was ahead of its time, and it's still a fun film. We're back at it again. David Blie Garcia brings us a uptaked. We're at it again. So David Blie Garcia brings us a legacy sequel that creates its own timeline, ignoring any of the other sequels, and brings back Sally from the original film, the OG Final Girl, face off against Old Man Leatherface for Netflix's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I'm going to say this up front. We're going to be putting out an episode about this at some point next week, so a lot of my thoughts for why I have issues with this film are going to be expounded upon in that, because they do veer into spoiler territory. With that said, let's talk about the premise. So a group of young idealistic millennials travel into a small town in Texas looking to basically reinvent a dead town, and in the process end up killing Leatherface's mother and awaken the beast. This is probably the best sequel that we have gotten to Texas Chainsaw Massacre since 1986's Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I really have just such a blast with that. And then the timeline's kind of weird. If you know, you know. But this one, being a legacy sequel, is interesting because of how it uses its legacy characters. By saying this Leatherface, it doesn't quite feel like he's in continuity with the 1974 Leatherface. More like the 2003 version. That's okay, because this movie is brutal AF. Like, this lives up to the name Massacre. Think back to the original 1974 version. I think there's a Mandela effect with her brains, because it's largely a fairly bloodless movie. And, well, they rectify that for this new updated sequel to the 70s classic. First time too that I will also say that this still contains the slasher formula. It pays great homage to its source material, but I think also too, it actually creates a fairly humanizing version of Leatherface. That has been a constant complaint of mine since 1986's Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Now, I do love it. I think it's a fun movie. I have the poster hanging in my office. But that movie got away from what made Leatherface such a compelling character that Tobe Hooper creates. I get the whole rights thing and the backstory about why they did that, but Tobe really kind of started a trend there. So when you get into 1990 and 1996 and 2003 and 2000 and the 2006 prequel and the 2013 legacy sequel, and then you get into the prequel back in 2017 with Leatherface, all what you're finding is Leatherface just kind of becomes this mindless oaf. Like, he is just a guy that kills people because he's told to. There are certain sequences within the original that really expound upon that and make him human and make him kind of a sympathetic character almost. Really weird to say and really weird to hear, but I think that you have some like the window shots and just kind of some of the way that he reacts in the third act of that film that kind of make a case for that point. And I feel like Garcia as a filmmaker understood that and understood who Leatherface was as a character and is able to replicate that in this movie. One of my favorite sequences in this movie is the fact that we get a shot of Leatherface actually mourning. It's weird, but it feels right with the character. And it really truly humanizes him in ways that we've never seen with Freddy, Jason, Michael, Jigsaw, so on and so forth. There are other legacy characters that do come back. I mentioned Sally earlier, and that's kind of one of the more problematic points of this film. In the new Scream, you know that like the legacy characters of Arquette, Campbell, and Cox, they come back and they're kind of sprinkled throughout and then kind of really unite together, and they are kind of the heroes of the third act. And with this film in particular, the film opens up on kind of where Sally, kind of the trauma that befell Sally, and then you kind of get to see like shots of her. And the third act, problematic. Again, when I opened up this video, I put a disclaimer on here that some of my problematic areas I can't get into in this video because it does veer into spoiler territory, so I'm just gonna release it as the word problematic. Problematic areas too, you bring in a new crop of characters. Really, I found myself compelled more by the setting of this small town and kind of the inability to escape. It really heightens the anxiety of this film, and I really liked the setting of what they were going to do and kind of this new cast of characters. Honestly, I'm cool with them bringing back the original Leatherface. I thought that was a beautiful touch, especially the thing that kind of reawakens him. But bringing back a lot of the other legacy just feels like fan service that is undeserved. Jump into it more into our full-length spoiler-filled podcast, but I'm just going to leave it at that right now. Just like other slashers, there's not a whole lot of depth here, and it's interesting because there is, but there isn't. The characters feel really one note, with the exception of Elsie Fisher's character. Lila is the survivor of a school shooting, which allows the film to feel modern, but also at the same time allows her to connect with the Sally character in really interesting ways, but also being traumatized by this and kind of how that trauma affects her character journey throughout is just a fascinating thing to watch unfold. There's a lot of depth to this. Outside of her, there's not really a whole lot that you get to see, and that's kind of the downside of slashers sometimes, is that you're not going to find depth here. Everything is going to be as smart as Scream, but not everything is going to be as brutal as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, if you guys thought Halloween Kills was brutal, I think this one kind of is neck and neck, if not a little more brutal. Comes into some of my favorite parts of this movie are when you're a gore hound like I am, you come for blood. This movie does not disappoint in that area. I feel like this is a movie not only for Texas Chainsaw Massacre fans, but horror fans. Like, I feel like if you're not integrated into the love of this genre, you're not going to love this movie. As a fan, as one of the writers of our horror department, and also at the same time one of the co-hosts of our foundational horror podcast, check us out. Kind of landed in a sweet spot for me because, you know, I love the genre and I'm a big fan of the franchise despite its shortcomings. And so I'm going to preface my rating by saying that, and also kind of throwing a warning out there that if you're not a fan of this franchise, if you're not a fan of blood, and if you are not a fan of horror, this one, skip it. Pacing of this movie too is almost very much in line with the original one, which is also really nice. But the original Tobe Hooper film, the pacing of that movie is done at not quite a slow pace, but it's kind of like a medium pace where it's not really fast. But this one is kind of somewhere between like medium and fast. It's not quite medium, but it's not quite fast, but yet it uses its time effectively. It's entertaining, it's a blast, but also at the same time, it's not afraid to kind of get its hands dirty and talk about things like grief, PTSD, trauma, and even more recently, some of the different how different parts of the country handle stuff like racism and the history of racism. And I'll expound upon some of these points in our spoiler-filled episode. Make sure you guys subscribe to our podcast. Links are in the bio. And I'm going to give this one a rating. I'm going to go ahead and actually give this one a 4. I thought that this movie is really entertaining. It's a lot of fun. It's shot really well. The performances in it are pretty solid, actually. I mean, there's not a whole lot that you can do with slashers. I know that they're kind of like bottom of the barrel in some people's eyes. Despite some of my gripes with this movie, I think they do a great job at paying homage to Hoover's 74 vision for the most part. I think the Elsie Fisher character is a fascinating character study, and having her kind of be kind of like the Sally is also very interesting. Tackles social commentaries very subtly, and it kind of gives it a little bit of intelligence, but I mean, this one is basically a 80-minute bloodbath. And that's okay. I think this is a film for horror fans. This is a film for fans that are love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Into this one's mental health moment, make sure that you guys comment below and let me know what your favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel is. I am actually gonna go probably the controversial choice and actually say the remake. It's kind of a cop-out, but my favorite sequel would probably be New Next Generation. Controversy, discuss, and cancel me in the comments. Matthew McConaughey, what can I say? That one's just a fun time. Get into mental health moment. If you guys are new to our content, mental health moment is where we take a theme of mental health from the film or TV show we are talking about, pull it out and expand upon it for just a few moments in hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. This one, I feel like we could have gone the route of the Elsie Fisher character, but honestly, one of my favorite sequences in this is it's just such a simple scene, and it's basically like Leatherface kind of coming to grips with the fact that he has lost his mother. The scene where the character goes into his mother's closet, pulls out a dress, and sits down at her makeup chair and just weeps and just holds it. It's a really elegant moment as a reminder that we all feel grief, we all feel pain, we all feel hurt, and grief is a interesting process to talk about because it's so different for everyone. Like, everyone feels grief and everyone feels these layers, but also at the same time, it's interesting to note how we all respond differently. Wow, Leatherface's response to his mother's grief is very much frowned upon in the real world. It does also show that grief can manifest into some pretty extreme things if it's left unresolved. Those of you guys that have been fans of this franchise for a long time, you know that that character is mostly a stoic, quiet type. And I'm going to say just open up. I mean, even if you have to find a healthy alternative, don't be silent. Like, open up and let someone in. Grief is going to manifest in some ways, and sometimes it's going to take years before we can talk about what we're feeling and to put it into words. Healthy alternatives to better suit your grief and to cope with recent loss, and understand that you're not alone. My suggestion and my hope would be that you would watch this video and realize that you're not alone. I've several tattoos to people that I've lost, and that has always been kind of a grieving point for me. But I also want to, if you need someone to talk to, consider the links in our descriptions below. Unresolved trauma can essentially create gaps in relationships, sometimes violent behavior as we see here, but also at the same time can also be pretty significant in moving forward and having other relationships. So please stay with us and consider the resources in the descriptions below. It's okay not to be okay. On that note, keep an eye out for our Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Book of Boba Fett, Peacemaker, and more series coming to the podcast. Make sure that you guys hit subscribe down here and let me know what you guys thought of this movie. If you guys haven't seen it, you guys watch it, come back and let me know. Tweet to us and just let us know. Let's talk Texas Chainsaw all weekend. Have a good weekend, guys.